Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm not doing any type of film discussion review, but I did want to discuss something that I think is really newsworthy for any of us that are big lovers of movies, cinephiles, and so on. And I don't know if anybody's caught it, and I don't see it really making the rounds on socials or internet, but recently Quentin Tarantino gave an interview at Sundance, Hawaii with Pake, which the channel's called Pake Salmon on YouTube. And I'm not familiar with this particular person, but this person snagged a really great interview with what I would describe as probably one of our greatest living directors, one of the most interesting, one of the most courageous, boldest, most original directors that the U.S. has ever produced. And he's still alive. I love that a guy like Tarantino is getting his flowers now. I love that he has had a 30-year career and people are still excited for what he might do. The reason I wanted to talk about this interview is because it sounds like Tarantino is done, calling it quits. There had been, a year or two ago, rumblings about his final movie being something called The Film Critic or The Movie Critic, I can't remember which. And unfortunately, that script was leaked online. And obviously, Tarantino was furious about it because that's a terrible thing to do to somebody. And he's like, screw it, I'm not doing it. And he just sort of shut it all down. There was all the speculation for at least a year about who was being cast, that maybe Travolta was coming back, that maybe he was casting some high profile stand-up comedians. And I was really excited for it because I'm really excited for anything Tarantino does. I have loved every film he's ever done. He's such a unique visionary. And what I love most about him is he's one of us. He is a film nerd. This is a guy who basically grew up, again, he was an adult man, at a video store. And instead of going to film school like a lot of guys, he went to the movies and he watched movies and rented movies and really built this incredible expertise on film, on genre, on directors. And, we are all the beneficiary of his education with a 30-year career and 9 or 10 great films. And again, it sounds like in this interview, and I'll put it in the link below here, he kind of says in the interview that 2019 was sort of the last year of movies, and we all know what happened in 2020. And I don't know that Hollywood has really recovered from lockdowns, from all of those things. I think Tom Cruise saved movie theaters with Top Gun Maverick. Steven Spielberg even said so. And people were excited to go back to the movies. But it sounds like from Tarantino's perspective that it's just really hard to make and present movies, not make movies, because of course he's an expert, he can make movies, but getting those movies out the way he would want them to. He talks about how there's sort of a 4-week pony show of putting films in theaters and then boom, immediately putting them on streaming. Whereas it used to be the case that you release a movie, and a movie, if it did well, would sit in theaters for, months, maybe even a year or multiple years. You'd have re-releases of films into the theaters, and because of streaming, we just don't get that anymore. And he laments, as I do, this sort of severe retraction of movies, of movie culture, of theater going and Hollywood. And I'm an indie guy. I don't have a ton of inside the industry sort of insights, but I do talk to people, and I know people who know people, and we've sort of watched the entire industry sort of consolidate over the past few years. There's been a lot of sort of reshuffling. The projects that are hitting theaters now for a lot of major studios were movies and projects that were greenlit years ago, and they may or may not be hitting with audiences. And studio heads are aware of this problem, and they're trying to pivot as best they can. I truly hope that they are able to pivot in time, because I don't want to live in a world where people aren't excited to go to theater and watch movies anymore. And that's essentially what one of the things Tarantino talks about in this interview. Um, he talks about the joy that he's getting from putting up a play. He's written a play, and he talks about how not only is he enjoying it, and the rehearsal process and casting people, which he won't reveal the cast, which I think is kind of fun, but he talks about how the business model of plays is pretty cut and dried. It's open, and you, you know how much money you're making because people have to buy tickets to sit in the theater to watch your film. Whereas with film and movies and streaming, it's not as clear as it is, as it used to be. Just okay, so you sell so many tickets to movie theaters, and you had this much money coming from DVD sales. Nobody buys DVDs anymore. There is a small sort of Blu-ray market, but it isn't what it used to be. It's harder for studios and the business to recoup on their investments. And these are the things he's lamenting. But with plays, he can write the way he wants. And of course, he did that with movies, but he has fewer strictures. It's a much clearer business model. And so that seems to be where he's going. He also is writing a lot in terms of novels. He had the novel of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is excellent and actually fills in things from the movie that aren't filled out in the movie. And so that is worth a read. Excuse me about the throat clearing. One other thing too is I have, what was it, a year or two ago, I took time to read his book, Cinema Speculation. And it took me a really long time to do, because every time he would start talking about a particular movie that I wasn't familiar with, hadn't seen, I would stop reading and I would go and watch the movie, because I didn't want to read further and have said movie spoiled. And it was really cool because I got a sense of his influences, why he liked certain movies, what he was watching as a kid in the 70s, and all of these things. And again, he talks about all of these things in this interview, but it kind of breaks my heart that he feels that the industry just doesn't want to support the theater going experience anymore. I think that can be done. I think it's just, again, what we're seeing, I think, is an industry that's having a harder time making return back on their investment, but an industry that also won't take risks like they used to. Say what you want about Harvey Weinstein, but the guy took massive risks with almost every film that he produced of Quentin Tarantino's. If you look on paper, the films that Quentin was going to produce and eventually produced, you'd be like, what is this? Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction. This isn't even in order. Kill Bill. This is cheesy. And then of course he made them, and they're all classics. They're all amazing films that are unforgettable. Some of the best dialogue, the best scenes I've ever seen in any film. We don't take those risks anymore. It feels like those risks and that originality are largely confined to the horror genre. That makes money. You can make a horror film that's about aliens. You can make a horror film that's more religious in nature. You can make a horror film that is like a murder mystery, true crime type film. But that's about it. And I think that's why it's easier to produce films that are in or around the horror genre, maybe even some sci-fi, than anything else. But yeah, it's a weird time in Hollywood right now. And if somebody like Quentin Tarantino is sounding the alarm, it's, man, that's not good. Doesn't mean Hollywood's done. I don't think Hollywood is done. There have been times in its history before where it's gone through expansions and retractions. This really isn't anything new. And again, I'm a guy on the outside. I don't necessarily know how the streaming model works. I don't know if it's better than theater going. Are people streaming more because they don't necessarily care for what's going out to theaters? Are they more comfortable just streaming from home? I don't know. I will do both. I want more reasons to go out to the theaters. We've had a few things that have gotten tons of people out. Top Gun Maverick, Wicked, these various films that did well. Dune was really great. Both parts loved. I just wish there was a little bit more for that. Um, Excuse my dog barking if you guys can hear that. So, in light of these uncertain times in Hollywood, the, I guess, inability or difficulty in committing of keeping films in theaters, it sounds like Tarantino, he's looking back on his career. This is a guy who's had a 30-year incredible career, 9, 10 films, all bangers. And he says as much. Rarely do people get the opportunity to go out, leaving them wanting more. And when he said that, I'm like, oh, he's absolutely right. It would make sense that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is his love letter to Hollywood, to LA, that's a beautiful sort of career sort of end cap. You start with Reservoir Dogs and you end with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and which is truly one of his most romantic films, despite some of the violence in it. It really is. This is a guy who truly loves Hollywood, truly loves this era of the late '60s and early '70s. And he really lit that movie on fire. So I can kind of understand if you have these people online and just the invasiveness of the internet, of people these days, of spoiling things and leaking your script. I could see where say, F it, I'm done. I have an amazing body of work. I have a 30-year career that is all that I could have hoped for, and I've done it. I've kind of done everything. Why would I subject myself to the stupidity of this current internet culture, the social media culture, and an industry that isn't sure of its footing at the moment, is hesitant to keep films in movie theaters. Yeah, I mean, I don't blame the guy. Again, selfishly, I want this guy to make everything that he wants to make. But if he doesn't want to keep making films, none of us can force him. And I wouldn't want him to, he's not the type of guy who will make something because we, his admirers, his fans want him to. This is a guy who does exactly what he wants to do. And it's just so incredible that a guy who is so sure of his vision and knows exactly the type of stories and films he wants to make did it, 10 times over 30 years? That's incredible when you hear the stories that people go through in this industry, maybe not making the movie they wanted to make, or there are too many cooks in the kitchen, and so what they intended wasn't what the end film what they wanted, and so forth. Tarantino, wow, not only is he an outsider, is he an indie, he's a film nerd, he's one of us. He's also an incredible genius, and he got to do exactly what he wanted to do. So, from that perspective, hey, we'll always have his movies. We can always watch, and I do. God, the past 6 years, I've done a more intense dive into film than I ever have. And, if I could achieve half of what that guy achieved, it'll all be worth it. But he's also, he's a new dad. He's got kids. He's got a wife. He's having a really great time. And he talks about it in this interview of introducing his son to these old school superheroes and different sort of franchises like the real Ghostbusters and action figures, Luke Cage, and the Marvel stuff, like the old school Marvel stuff. And I think that's really cool. It's so fun to see this guy who really is a big kid who got to go into the toy store and create all the stories he wanted to, now sort of imbuing that onto his children. I just think it's so cool. I love him as a filmmaker, but I really admire the guy as a man, a guy who really stuck to his guns, did it on his terms, really just seemed to have really lucked out with the opportunities that were in front of him, but also maintained his integrity and his vision and made it happen. And now, he's able to sort of pass this on to his kids. And, it's like, yeah, I mean, sometimes you just have to let your heroes ride off into the sunset. I think there's a few legendary actors that I've loved their work. But to be honest, I'm kind of sick of seeing them. It's like, do we have to see the same 10 people in everything? Again, it's where we're at in an industry right now, where it's the same 10 people in everything, and we're gonna do the safest things we possibly can. And then we wonder why sales are down. Why is nobody going to the theater? Why is everything going direct to streaming? I'm waiting for, again, as I understand it, the theater heads understand this. They're trying to pivot, and so I just hope they're able to do it in time. I hope for the best for Tarantino in his life, just as a person. But if he's got a couple more in him, and if we're able to correct course of the ship of the industry, maybe it's not the end. But if it is, I totally get why he would do it. Incredible career. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, beautiful end cap to a beautiful career. And, leave him wanting more, right? So, yeah, check out the interview below if you have thoughts on it. Is this just him maybe just, having sort of like an older man sort of complaining moment, or maybe, and you're allowed to. Somebody like him, he can bitch and moan about anything he wants, man, because he's been on the inside. He knows the best of it and the worst of it. But I'd love to get a sense of what you guys think. You think he's really done? Has he pivoted? Is he going to ride off into the sunset, or do you think he has a couple more in him? So let me know below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.